The crystal chandelier sparkled overhead as voices blended into a symphony of success. But in that split second, when Rebecca Morgan watched the well-dressed couple casually take the reserved seat beside her, the one with the small name card that read Dr. Amara Thompson, she felt the familiar sting that no amount of achievement could ever fully erase, and in their eyes, she saw what she'd seen 1,000 times before, the assumption that she didn't belong. The gallery space was magnificent, all marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, hosting an exclusive investors' reception for Hartwell and Klein, a promising tech startup seeking final round funding. And Rebecca had arrived early, quietly taking her assigned seat at table 7, wearing an elegant navy dress and her mother's pearl earrings, her natural hair pulled back in a graceful bun, her notebook resting in her lap as she observed the room with the careful attention that had made her one of the most respected venture capitalists in the Midwest. She'd built her firm, Cornerstone Capital, from nothing, starting with a small inheritance from her grandmother, and turning it into a $40 million fund that had launched 17 successful companies, created hundreds of jobs, and made her the go-to investor for founders who valued both capital and wisdom. But none of that mattered in moments like this, when a couple in their 40s, the man in an expensive suit, the woman dripping in jewelry, approached table 7, glanced at the empty seats, then looked at Rebecca, sitting alone, and made a decision that spoke volumes. "Excuse me," the woman said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think you might be at the wrong table. This section is for investors and VIP guests." Rebecca took a slow breath, her hands steady despite the heat rising in her chest, and replied with quiet dignity, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The man stepped forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look, we don't want to make a scene, but these are reserved seats perhaps. You're looking for the catering staff area," his wife added, almost kindly, as if doing Rebecca a favor, "or maybe you're someone's assistant. The general seating is over there." Rebecca could have ended it right then. Could have told them she was Dr. Amara Thompson's guest. No, more than that. She was the primary investor they'd been hoping to impress, but something stopped her, a quiet voice that whispered, "Let them show you who they are." "I'll stay here," she said simply, "but thank you for your concern." The couple exchanged irritated glances, and then, astonishingly, they sat down anyway, right in the seats marked for Dr. Thompson and her associate, effectively boxing Rebecca out of the conversation as more guests arrived, treating her like furniture, like she was invisible. The evening progressed with excruciating awkwardness as Rebecca remained seated, observing everything while the couple who introduced themselves to others as David and Patricia Hartwell laughed loudly, clinked glasses, and worked the room with the kind of aggressive networking that spoke of desperation masked as confidence. David Hartwell, she realized, was the co-founder of the very company seeking investment, and his wife Patricia clearly fancied herself the social orchestrator of their success, touching arms, complimenting dresses, making sure everyone knew about their groundbreaking AI platform and their revolutionary approach to data analytics. Rebecca listened carefully, noting the buzzwords, the lack of substance beneath the polish, the way David dodged specific questions about user retention and revenue models, pivoting instead to vague promises about disrupting the industry and unicorn potential. She watched other investors nod politely, some genuinely interested, others merely being courteous, and she noticed Dr. Amara Thompson, across the room, a brilliant Nigerian-British computer scientist whose research the Hartwells claimed to have built their platform. Upon looking increasingly uncomfortable as David presented ideas that sounded suspiciously similar to her published papers without proper attribution, Rebecca had done her homework, as she always did. She'd read Thompson's original research, reviewed the Hartwell and Klein pitch deck 3 times, interviewed 2 of their former employees confidentially, and discovered troubling patterns, a toxic workplace culture, high turnover among women and minorities, and a product that was more smoke and mirrors than actual innovation. She'd been planning to pass on the investment entirely, but Dr. Thompson had personally reached out, explaining that she'd joined as a technical advisor, hoping to reform the company from within, and asking Rebecca to meet with her at this event before making a final decision, hence the reserved seat that the Hartwells now occupied. Oblivious to the irony, as dinner was served, a beautiful spread of herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables that Rebecca barely touched, Patricia Hartwell turned to the investor on her right, a silver-haired man named Richard, and said in a voice just loud enough for Rebecca to hear, "You know what's wrong with these events now? They let just anyone in, probably, trying to meet some diversity quota, and it brings down the whole caliber." Richard looked uncomfortable, glancing at Rebecca, but Patricia continued, emboldened by wine and her own sense of superiority. "I mean, we built our company on merit, on excellence. We don't believe in handouts or lowering standards just to check boxes." David chuckled, adding, "Exactly. Honey, we hire the best, invest in the best, partner with the best, no exceptions, no apologies." Rebecca felt every word like a paper cut, small but stinging, the cumulative effect designed to make her feel small, to make her leave, and she thought about her grandmother, Sarah Morgan, who'd cleaned houses for 30 years, who'd saved every spare dollar in a coffee tin, who'd told young Rebecca, "Baby, they're going to try to make you feel like you don't belong in every room you enter, but you plant your feet and you bloom right where you stand. You've got just as much right to the sun as any flower in the garden." So Rebecca stayed, chin up, hands folded, silent but present, bearing witness. Dr. Amara Thompson finally approached table 7 around 8:30, her elegant burgundy gown flowing behind her, her eyes immediately finding Rebecca with a warm, apologetic smile, and then landing on the Hartwells with confusion. "Oh," Amara said, her British accent crisp, "I believe you're in my seat." Patricia looked up, clearly not recognizing the woman whose research formed the foundation of her husband's company, and said dismissively, "These seats were empty, we're the hosts. We can sit wherever we'd like." Amara's eyebrows rose. "I'm Dr. Amara Thompson, your technical advisor, and this is my reserved seat time here to meet with Ms. Morgan." She gestured to Rebecca, and for the first time all evening, the Hartwells actually looked at Rebecca, really looked, and David's face went pale as recognition began to dawn. "Ms. Morgan," he repeated weakly. "Rebecca Morgan." Amara smiled, reaching for Rebecca's hand and helping her stand. "Yes, Rebecca Morgan of Cornerstone, capital only, the most sought-after investor in the Midwest, and the woman who holds the deciding vote on your Series B funding." The color drained from Patricia's face as the words sank in, as the reality of what they'd done, how they'd treated her, what they'd said came crashing down around them. And David stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his wine glass, stammering, "Ms. Morgan, we didn't time. So sorry. We thought," but Rebecca held up a gentle hand, her voice calm and measured. "You thought what, exactly, Mr. Hartwell? That I was catering staff, someone's assistant, that I didn't belong at the investors' table?" Patricia's eyes filled with tears, whether from embarrassment or genuine remorse, Rebecca couldn't tell. And the older woman whispered, "We made a terrible mistake." "Let us explain," but Amara interjected, her voice sharp with disappointment. "No. Let me explain. This is precisely why I called this meeting, Rebecca. This is the culture I was telling you about." The four of them stepped away from the table, moving to a quiet corner of the gallery where an abstract painting in blues and golds provided a backdrop for a conversation that would change everything. Amara spoke first, her words measured but passionate, explaining how she'd joined Hartwell and Klein 6 months ago, believing in their stated mission of democratizing AI for underserved communities, only to discover that the diversity and inclusion language in their pitch deck was pure performance, that the actual team was homogeneous and hostile to different perspectives. that her contributions were minimized in meetings, while her ideas were repackaged as David's insights, and that the fundamental technology was far less developed than they'd led investors to believe. I've tried to address these issues internally, Amara said, exhaustion evident in her voice. But tonight, seeing how they treated you, Rebecca, without even knowing who you were, confirmed everything I've been concerned about. This isn't just about business practices, it's about character. David's face was red, sweat beading on his forehead as his entire funding round his company's future collapsed in real time, and he began making excuses. It was an honest mistake. We've been under so much stress. We're not prejudiced people. We're just. But Rebecca cut him off, not with anger, but with something more powerful, truth. Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell, she said quietly, I want to tell you a story. 20 years ago, when I was fresh out of business school, with more student debt than sense, I walked into a venture capital firm for a job interview. I was qualified top of my class, 2 successful internships, glowing recommendations, but the partner took one look at me and said, we're looking for someone who fits our culture. I didn't get the job. And that phrase, culture fit, I heard it again and again, in a dozen different ways, all meaning the same thing. You don't look like what we think success looks like. Patricia was crying openly now, mascara streaking her cheeks, but Rebecca continued, her voice steady. So I started my own fund with my grandmother's inheritance, $27,000. And I made it my mission to invest in companies that others overlooked. Founders who didn't fit the typical Silicon Valley mold, ideas that solved real problems for real people. And do you know what I discovered? That excellence has no default setting. It comes in every color, every gender, every background, but only if you're actually looking for it, rather than looking for your own reflection. The gallery continued buzzing around them, oblivious to the reckoning happening in the corner, as David Hartwell seemed to crumble before their eyes, the bluster and confidence evaporating to reveal a man who'd built his entire empire on shortcuts and assumptions, on taking credit for others' work, and surrounding himself with people who'd never challenge him. I don't expect you to invest, he said finally, his voice hollow. I know we don't deserve it. I know I don't deserve it. Patricia reached for Rebecca's hand, then thought better of it, her own hands trembling as she said, I was raised to be better than this. My mother would be ashamed of me. Am ashamed of me. There was a long silence, broken only by the distant clink of glasses and murmur of conversation, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her, a familiar struggle between the part that wanted justice, wanted them to fail, to learn the hard way, and the part that remembered grace, that remembered her grandmother's other lesson, hurt people, baby, and healed people, heal people. You'll get to choose which one you're going to be. She looked at Amara, whose expression was unreadable, a mixture of hope and skepticism, waiting to see what Rebecca would do with this power, this moment. I'm not going to invest in Hartwell and Klein, Rebecca said finally, and she watched David's shoulders slump in defeat, at least, not as it currently exists. She paused, letting the words settle. But I am going to make you an offer, and it's the only one you're going to get from me, or anyone else. I suspect, once word of this evening gets around. David looked up, a desperate hope flickering in his eyes. Dr. Thompson becomes co-founder and CEO, Rebecca stated clearly, with full equity adjustment to reflect her actual contributions to the technology. You, David, step back to Chief Strategy Officer, with a reduced role in mandatory leadership coaching. The entire executive team goes through 6 months of intensive culture training with a firm I'll recommend. You commit to transparent hiring practices with measurable diversity goals, not quotas, but genuine pipeline development and inclusive processes, and you give me full quarterly reports with independent verification. She crossed her arms. If you agree to all of that, I'll invest $3 million in a restructured Series B, and I'll help you build something actually worth building. Not a house of cards, but a real company with real values and real impact. The shock on their faces was almost comical. The whiplash from certain failure to unexpected second chance leaving them momentarily speechless, until Amara spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Rebecca, you don't have to." But Rebecca smiled at her new potential partner. "I know I don't have to, but I want to invest in you, Amara, in your vision, in what this could become if the right person is leading it." She turned back to the heart. "This offer expires in 48 hours. Talk to your lawyers, talk to each other, and decide if you're actually willing to change, or if you just want to keep playing the same games, with a different mask." Patricia wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. "Why? Why would you give us this chance after how we treated you?" Rebecca considered the question, really considered it, reaching back through the years to all the times she'd been underestimated, dismissed, disrespected, and remembering the few crucial moments when someone had seen her potential anyway, had invested in her despite her lack of pedigree or connections, had believed that people could grow beyond their worst moments. "Because I believe that people can change if they genuinely want to," she said softly, "and because the best revenge isn't watching you fail, it's making sure that what you build actually helps people, actually opens doors instead of slamming them shut, actually becomes the thing you pretended it was in your pitch deck." She picked up her purse, preparing to leave. "And because my grandmother taught me that grace isn't something people earn. It's something you give because of who you are, not who they are." The Hartwells stood frozen as Rebecca and Amara walked away together, their heads bent in conversation about term sheets and organizational restructuring, about Amara's vision for ethical AI and Rebecca's network of potential clients, about building something meaningful from the ashes of something broken. As they reached the gallery exit, Rebecca paused and looked back one final time at David and Patricia, still standing in the corner, clearly shaken to their core, and she felt something unexpected, not satisfaction or superiority, but a quiet hope that this rupture might become a breakthrough, that this humiliation might become humility, that this ending might actually be a beginning. 2 days later, the signed agreements arrived at Cornerstone Capital, every condition accepted, every change agreed to, along with a handwritten letter from Patricia that began, "I have spent 2 days examining my life and my choices, and I don't like what I've seen," and went on for 3 pages of genuine acknowledging the privileges she'd never questioned, the biases she'd never confronted, the harm she'd caused while considering herself a good person. David's accompanying letter was shorter, but no less sincere, admitting that he'd built a company based on his own ego, rather than any real mission, and thanking Rebecca for holding up a mirror I desperately needed to see. Over the following months, Rebecca watched the transformation with cautious optimism, meeting quarterly with Amaranal CEO, who reported both struggles and victories. 2 executives who refused to adapt and left, replaced by talented leaders from non-traditional backgrounds. A complete product audit that revealed the need for 9 months of additional development, delaying their launch, but ensuring integrity. Customer discovery sessions with the communities they claimed to serve, fundamentally reshaping their approach. And slowly, gradually, the emergence of a real company culture built on respect rather than hierarchy, on collaboration rather than competition, on actual excellence rather than the appearance of it. Rebecca attended the relaunch event 18 months later, watching Amara present their refined AI platform, now genuinely innovative, genuinely useful, genuinely ethical, to a room full of potential clients from nonprofit organizations, school districts, and community health centers, the very underserved markets they'd originally claimed to care about but had never actually engaged. David Hartwell gave a brief introduction, and Rebecca noticed how different he seemed, quieter, more thoughtful, willing to share credit and admit uncertainty, and, when he acknowledged his past failures publicly, thanking Rebecca for an intervention I didn't know I needed and didn't think I deserved. There was genuine humility in his voice that couldn't be faked. Patricia had joined the company's advisory board, focusing specifically on supplier diversity and inclusive design, bringing the same energy she'd once used for social climbing to actually meaningful work. And when she approached Rebecca during the reception, there was none of the desperate neediness from that first night, just simple gratitude. "I wanted to thank you again," Patricia said, "not just for the investment, but for the mirror. It's been the hardest and most important work of my life, looking at my own biases, understanding how much harm I've done while thinking I was harmless." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I can't undo how I treated you that night, or how I've treated countless others over the years with my assumptions and my arrogance. But I'm trying to do better, to be better, and I wanted you to know that your grace didn't just change our company, it changed me." Rebecca reached out and squeezed her hand. "That's all any of us can do, acknowledge the harm, do the work, and choose better going forward." As the evening wound down and Rebecca prepared to leave, Amara pulled her aside with tears in her eyes. "You know the investment was the smallest thing you gave us, right? The money mattered, obviously, but what you really gave us was a chance to become who we should have been from the beginning. You saw what we could be and invested in that, even when all the evidence suggested we didn't deserve it." Rebecca smiled, thinking of her grandmother, of the coffee tin full of dollars saved from cleaning other people's houses, of the dreams planted in a little girl who was told she could bloom anywhere. "That's what real investment is," she said softly. "Not just betting on what is, but nurturing what could be in companies and in people." She looked around the room, at the diverse faces, the genuine conversations, the mission-driven organization that had emerged from that painful night at the gallery. And she thought about all the other investments in her portfolio, the founders she'd believed in when others wouldn't, the second and third chances she'd extended, the garden of possibilities she'd been cultivating for 2 decades. Besides, she added with a knowing smile, the best returns aren't always measured in money. Sometimes they're measured in lives changed, doors opened, and cycles broken. 3 years after that fateful evening, Rebecca received an invitation to speak at a venture capital conference about impact, investing beyond the buzzwords. And as she stood on stage, looking out at hundreds of investors still, overwhelmingly white and male, though slowly changing, she told the story of Hartwell and Klein, of the couple who took her seat, and the company that became something beautiful only after being broken down to its foundation. "The question I get asked most often," she said, her voice carrying through the silent auditorium, "is how do I identify good investments? What's my secret formula?" She paused, making eye contact with faces in the crowd, some genuinely curious, some skeptical, some seeing her presence on that stage as proof that the world was changing, others seeing it as an uncomfortable obligation to endure. The truth is, there's no algorithm for human potential. You can't reduce it to pattern matching or culture fit, or any of the other proxies we use to avoid examining our own assumptions. The best investments I've ever made were in people who didn't look like the typical success story, who'd been overlooked or underestimated, who had something to prove and a mission beyond just making money. And the worst pitches I've heard have come from people with impeccable pedigrees and impressive networks who thought success was their birthright, rather than something you earned through character and contribution. She clicked to the next slide, showing Hartwell and Klein's growth trajectory, not hockey stick explosive, but steady, sustainable, profitable, with industry-leading retention rates and customer satisfaction scores. This company should have been a past toxic culture, overstated technology, founders with more ego than ethics. But I invested anyway, not because of what it was, but because of what it could become if the right conditions were created. Accountability, humility, genuine commitment to change. She smiled. And here's what I learned. Grace is not soft, it's strategic. Giving people a genuine chance to transform isn't naive optimism. It's recognizing that most behavior is responsive to systems and incentives, and if you change those fundamentally, you can change outcomes. The audience sat in silence, some nodding, some uncomfortable, all listening. But grace also requires accountability. Didn't just hand them money and hope for the best. I restructured leadership, demanded transparency, insisted on measurable change, and made it clear that the second chance was conditional on actual growth. She advanced to her final slide. A photo of her grandmother, Sarah, young and smiling in a picture from the 1960s, wearing her church dress and holding a Bible. This woman taught me everything I know about investment. She invested her labor, her savings, her dreams in me, expecting nothing in return except that I'd do something meaningful with the opportunities she never had. She taught me to see people's potential rather than their presentation, to value character over credentials, to believe in transformation because she lived it from the segregated South to watching her granddaughter build a multi-million-dollar fund. Rebecca's voice softened, thick with emotion, and she taught me that how you treat people when you have power reveals everything about who you really are. Not who you claim to be in your mission statement or your LinkedIn profile, but who you are when nobody's watching, when someone can't do anything for you, when you think they don't matter. She looked directly into the camera recording her talk, knowing this moment would be shared and quoted, wanting to choose her final words carefully. So here's my challenge to everyone in this room, and everyone who'll watch this later. The next time you walk into a space and make assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't, about who's important and who's invisible, about whose ideas matter and whose don't, pause. Ask yourself what you might be missing, what brilliance you might be overlooking, what investment you might be passing on because it doesn't match your pattern recognition. She smiled, because the person you dismissed might just be your next investor, your next partner, your next teacher, or simply a human being who deserves the same respect you expect for yourself. The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation, and as Rebecca left the stage, she felt her grandmother's presence like a hand on her shoulder, heard her voice like a whisper in her ear, "You bloomed, baby, and you're making sure others can bloom too."